Imagine you're a medieval peasant. The baron owns your village. The count owns the baron. The duke owns the count. And the king owns the duke. You are at the very bottom of a chain that controls every single thing about your life. Your land, your job, your freedom, who you marry, where you go. And you were born into it with absolutely no way out. This is the medieval noble ranking system: duke, earl, baron, count. For titles. For completely different levels of power. And today we're going to break down exactly what each one meant, how they got their power, and why the difference between them mattered more than anything else in the Middle Ages. Before we get into the ranks themselves, we need to understand where noble titles actually came from, because it wasn't just about being born rich. In the early Middle Ages, noble titles were military titles. A duke wasn't just a wealthy landowner. He was a military commander responsible for defending a region. A count was the king's representative in a specific territory, managing law and order. These were jobs first and hereditary titles second. Over time, as the feudal system solidified, titles became hereditary, passed from father to son. The job became the birthright. And with that shift, the noble class became a closed system. You couldn't buy your way in. You couldn't earn your way in. You were either born noble or you weren't. The king sat at the top and granted titles and land, called fiefs, in exchange for military service and loyalty. That single exchange, land for loyalty, created the entire hierarchy we're about to break down. At the very top of the noble hierarchy, just below the king, sat the duke. The word duke comes from the Latin dux, meaning leader or military commander. A duke controlled an entire duchy, a massive territory that could contain multiple counties and dozens of lordships. On his territory, his word was effectively law. He commanded his own army, ran his own courts, collected his own taxes. Some dukes were so powerful they rivaled the king himself. The most famous example, the Duke of Normandy. William the Duke of Normandy was technically a vassal of the French king. But in 1066 he invaded England, defeated King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, and became King of England himself. A duke so powerful he conquered a kingdom. In England, the title of duke didn't even exist until 1337, when King Edward III created the Dukedom of Cornwall for his son, because kings were reluctant to create rivals that strong. Below the duke came the earl in England, or the count in France and the rest of continental Europe. And here's something most people don't know. Earl and count are literally the same rank, just different words from different languages. Earl comes from the Old Norse word jarl, meaning chieftain, brought to England by Viking influence. Count comes from the Latin comes, meaning companion of the king. Same rank, same power, completely different cultural origin. An earl or count controlled a single county, enforcing royal law, collecting royal taxes, raising troops, and administering justice on behalf of the crown. But earls were often kingmakers. The Earl of Warwick in the 15th century was so powerful he was literally called the kingmaker, because he had enough military and political power to put two different kings on the English throne during the Wars of the Roses. Below the earl came the baron, the lowest of the major noble ranks, but still enormously powerful compared to ordinary people. The word baron comes from the Old French barrow, meaning man or warrior. Barons held land granted directly by the king or a higher lord. Within their barony they had their own courts, their own soldiers, their own rules. But the most important moment in baron history came in 1215. King John of England had been abusing his power for years, raising taxes illegally, ignoring noble rights, treating his own lords like servants. The barons had enough. They raised their armies, marched on London, and forced King John to the negotiating table at Runnymede. What they made him sign changed history forever: the Magna Carta, the Great Charter. For the first time in English history, the power of the king was legally limited. No free man could be imprisoned without trial. Taxes couldn't be raised without noble consent. The Magna Carta became the foundation of constitutional law, and it was the barons who forced it into existence. Every noble owed loyalty to the one above him, called fealty. When a baron received land from an earl, he knelt before him, placed his hands between the earl's hands, and swore an oath of loyalty called homage. It was legally binding. Break that oath and you were a traitor, your land seized, your title stripped, your life forfeit.